best that it possibly can be.
I call David Clinton.
Mr. Speaker, excuse me. Kia ora. Mr. Speaker, this is a bill that the Green Party would have liked to support. We looked very carefully at the original drafting of the bill. We made another decision after the Select Committee had done its work. And as much as we might wish to, we cannot support this legislation for a number of reasons. We recognise that the government, the state, holds a great deal of information about people, and we don't think for a moment that the regulations, the boundaries around information sharing are quite right yet. For example, I believe there are difficulties between district court and family court. Some information they may not share, which is not helpful in some specific cases. I think there's a degree of public concern that information held about children by schools or other agencies may not be available to their parents, and at times that's not helpful. So we do see that there's a need to address some of these issues, but sadly this bill does not do it. My colleague Jan Logie, in an earlier reading, the second reading I think, made the point that this is a fourth piece of legislation with significant privacy aspects to it that we have seen through the House in the last 12 months or so. And that would indicate to us that what's actually called for is a major overhaul along the lines of the Law Commission's proposition that we do need to take a step back and restructure the privacy laws. And this sort of meddling, these incremental changes around the edges are not actually serving the purpose. They're not achieving the goals. We've seen in the last 12 months, as a number of speakers have mentioned, some major failures of privacy. People's information has been released inappropriately. IRD, the ACC, work and income, justice, immigration, the list goes on. This doesn't give us any confidence that when we add another layer, when we open more potential for information sharing, that will be protected adequately, that there are sufficient protections in place. Technology has been mentioned, and clearly modern technology enables us to acquire, retain, manage, manipulate, analyse massive amounts of information, much more than was the case previously. And again, that creates opportunities for things to go wrong, either through malice or simply through human error. And occasionally, of course, the mistakes are purely through human error, people getting it wrong. The previous speaker, Mr. Little, alluded to the fact as well that in the public service there are some very busy, overworked people, so these errors are more likely to recur. It's interesting in that context that we're told the key purpose of this bill is to facilitate public services in line with this government's program of delivering better public services with a capital B and P and S to tell us how important it is to them. The Prime Minister last year said this delivery of better public services was all about being innovative, enterprising, driven and focused on results. Well, sadly, those of us who talk to people in the public sector, who understand what actually is going on in the public sector, know that the most innovative people in the public service are desperately trying to apply that innovation to trying to do more with less, trying to do their jobs well, despite cost-cutting, but despite the removal of resources. Sadly, some of the most enterprising of our public servants have simply given up the fight and gone off to work in the private sector. They've seen there's no future in amongst the constant cost-cutting and the other winding back of the public sector. Driven, I think many of them are nearly driven to drink by the constant restructuring of the public service, the constant re-amalgamations and splittings and shuffling of the deck chairs around the place, none of which is helpful. And focusing on results, sadly, is too often a tick box mentality. This is not what we want in our public sector. Putting the words facilitating public service into a piece of legislation does not make that achievable unless you actually resource that public service, unless you give it the means to protect people's information, to protect people's privacy, unless we can retain good people who can make the good value and judgment calls about the sharing of information in the way which is appropriate and that we would like to see achieved. So one issue that we have been concerned and continue to have concern about this bill is the empowering of the executive to create these information sharing agreements by regulation. This to us, creates the possibility that you could see agreements formed that are outside certainly the spirit of the Privacy Act, if not outside the letter of it. It gives the public less reason rather than more to be confident that the integrity of their information will be retained, that information will only be used appropriately and for the right reasons and by the right people. Scrutiny of the agreement. Again, we're told that copies of any of these agreements will be available on websites or at the office of the lead agencies. That's, again, not a particularly forceful or innovative way of making information available to people. There are such people as those who don't have access to the internet. Not many people routinely trawl the websites of government departments or indeed attend the offices of major government agencies. We simply don't see that people will actually be adequately informed, have the opportunity to know what agencies are sharing what information that may affect them, may affect their lives, their businesses, their families, whatever it may be. We simply don't think that protections built into here are adequate or sufficient, given the potential for things to go very wrong and the expectation, the reasonable expectation people have of a very high level of security for their information when they give it to the government in good faith. So the Law Commission's landmark on privacy laws in New Zealand made two key recommendations, neither of which is addressed in this legislation. The first was that the Commissioner should be able to issue compliance notices to agencies deemed to be in breach of the Privacy Act. And that would seem pretty much a bottom line. I suspect many people would expect the Commissioner to have that power now to require compliance where there are breaches. We would expect the Commissioner to have some very real teeth, and the Law Commission encouraged us to put such provisions in place. But sadly, this legislation, this bill that had the opportunity to do that, there is no such reference, there is no such mechanism, and we continue to have a well-meaning and a very capable Commissioner, sadly lacking teeth, lacking the levers, the capacity to actually demand compliance when breaches occur. The second power the Commission suggested we should give to the Commissioner is the power to require an audit of an agency's practices and systems for handling private information. It seems not unreasonable that we should have that watchdog body that casts an eye over the practice, the systems that are in place within departments. In the absence of such an audit, in the absence of such oversight, and as I've said, particularly in the context of a very stressed, under-resourced public sector with very low morale, one would expect that there would be that power given to the Commissioner to have oversight that the best practice was actually being applied. There could be considerable positive benefit in that, as well as insisting that no rules were being broken, that nothing was suboptimal. That would be an opportunity as well for the sharing of best practice. And so, sadly, there seems to be nothing to encourage or facilitate that. In essence then, and in summary, I guess we do see that, as I said at the beginning, we see a need to improve our performance, to put in place adequate regulation, protection of people's information, while at the same time facilitating sharing of that information in a way that does genuinely enable various government departments to do their job, to serve the interests of New Zealanders. In this legislation, sadly, the balance is far too much to privilege the state, to give much too much capacity and freedom to use information, to share it, far too little protection of people, far too little reassurance that the integrity of that information will be maintained, and for those reasons we will not be supporting this bill. Kia ora.
I call Kanwaljit Singh Bakshi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.